Welcome, everyone. This is Imagine All the People podcast, where we learn to appreciate our experiences and cherish the bond we have as human beings. I am your host, Daniel, and today I had the opportunity to talk to Khalil, who is a child of Child Protective Services and became homeless when he was just 19 years old.
My name is Khalil Ware. I'm 30 years old. I was born in Newark, New Jersey. Very early in my life, I ended up in Dyfus and I travel from home to home. I currently work as a technician. I lived most of my life in Dyfus, the CPS in New Jersey, and ended up homeless for 8 years.
And what exactly is DYFS?
DYFS would be the Division of Youth and Family Services. I believe they're now known as DCP&P. Their purpose is to basically take at-risk youth or children who do not have families to take them in and try to help provide them with homes and connect them with programs and other resources that they may need.
Okay, and what role did Child Protective Services play in your life?
So I would say that the role it played in my life was the constant sense of instability. I ended up in diapers very early on at the age of 2. I was abused by my grandmother, and addiction and alcoholism ran in my family on both sides. So basically, no one could really come forth to claim either myself or my siblings. So it was from that point on that we were taken in as babies, but I was never adopted and I ended up staying in the system. So the role that it played easily had to do with that sense of never really feeling like I belong anywhere, never really feeling attached to people, and admittedly not being able to develop those necessary healthy human bonds that I'm really only just now, as old as I am getting to understand and become more familiar with in a healthy sense.
Mm-hmm. So that must be very hard. And I know you mentioned before that you became homeless. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So the situation that had happened, I was 19. I was coming from another placement that I was in, what's called a transitional living home. It was located in Bridgewater, New Jersey, and it was a place for children of the system who were growing a little older, and it was intended to help them segue into independent living. That didn't quite work out for me for a multitude of reasons, and I ended up asking this previous foster parent, her name being Sue, to stay with her. I needed someplace to go. I was very afraid of not having a place to go, and I still need to go to school. So I figured calling her would be the best option. I trusted her to this, and she said yes. And so I was staying there for a while. I was commuting back and forth to the college I was going to at the time, and still traveling back and forth from Newark and to the school. It was like a 45-minute commute or so. And I'd come back home one particular night. I guess it was a little too late for her liking. And she told me, like, you can't stay here anymore. And I was confused. I'm like, I know we most likely have been probably going back and forth, but I don't understand this. Why is this? And, I didn't want to argue with her. I didn't want to even want to question her
Mm-hmm.
because it's like, hey, it's your house. I'm So I desperately called up a friend and saying, hey man, I'm getting kicked out, man. Please have a place to crash. And they came to pick me up that night, and that basically started everything.
And what was that first night like living away from Sue's home?
It was both familiar but also surreal because it's like I didn't get it, and I didn't really know what I was supposed to do at that point because it's like, under the surface, like, I know these people are being gracious to me, but I can't really stay here, and I kind of feel like I know that. So what am I supposed to do? What about school? What about money? What about shelter? What about this? I don't know how to do a lot of things. I don't understand. What am I supposed to do now? Needless to say, I was very scared.
Mm-hmm. And what was the reason why Sue kicked you out of her house in the first place?
So, to the best of my recollection, it was it was a combination between us having like kind of back and forth about, I guess, little things around the house. At best, it could be described as bickering between a parent and a teenager kind of deal, or at least that's how I would describe it. And both very, very stubborn personalities as well. But otherwise, I thought the underlying dynamic was concern and care and love. That was the only reason I'd even gone back to her. So, Yeah, it was a very interesting one. I guess you could call it steady, but at that point a little tumultuous.
But staying at Sue's home, did you feel a sense of belonging?
For the time I was there, yeah. Mind you, there was a time that I'd gotten to know her and her family, and I had grown a really close relationship with her son as well. I still to this day treat him very much like he's my own brother. Like, so yeah, I would definitely say so.
So I'm guessing that it was probably very hard for you to adjust. So how long exactly did your friends give you to stay at their apartment?
Honestly, I don't even recall specifics, but I can tell you it was only a matter of months at that point. I guess they thought I really wasn't doing anything, but I was really just trying to focus on getting to and from school. I didn't know how quickly I needed to get a job. I didn't know, do I get an apartment now? I didn't. I guess that they assumed that I was just trying not to do anything intentionally. It's just like, no, I'm kind of stuck. I'm not sure what to do.
And what was it like when they told you that you had to leave?
Yeah, they told me I had to eventually leave. They kind of felt like I wasn't doing much with myself, and I'm just like, I don't know much more you expect out of me. I kind of got thrust into the situation. I figured this was buying time, and I thought at the very least going to school would have been showing I was making some kind of initiative. I didn't know what else to do at the time.
And where did you go after you left their house?
So it was at that point that it was just where a lot of the travel began. I can tell you that I'd gone to what New Brunswick. I had ended up going to Hillsborough, back and forth from Newark over the span of all those years, either finding temporary apartments or not.
Now, were you always couch surfing or did you need to sleep on the streets sometimes?
Yeah, I had to sleep in a train station at one point. Actually, two of them. Probably shouldn't have had to sleep outside at least once or twice. No, I'm sorry, three train stations. I think about it. So, yeah, I've definitely had to do that. If we're talking like outside wilderness, no, nothing of the sort.
Okay. And so, since you were able to experience homelessness, what is a feeling that you would associate with it?
Despair for, I don't mean to come off dramatic, but it's just like, growing up, I had so much hope and so many expectations for my life because I wanted to take the reins and take control and think to myself, I understand I was in foster care, but I've seen all these people make success stories out of coming from similar situations. I just want that. I have to do that. And then for that to happen, and it's just like, so what? You now you can't even really blame anyone but you because now you're here, and it's it's desperate. It's terrifying. It's very much despair. It's because you never know if or when it's going to end. And there are more than a few times where I wondered that.
hmm Now, was there one particular moment where you felt despair the most?
Ooh, I'm actually very glad you asked that. So all right. So I was staying in a homeless shelter, and I did end up finding a temporary job over at the Dunkin' Donuts, on the behest of a friend of mine. He's like, "Hey man, you definitely need the money." Because I admit I wanted a job that could specifically help me get an apartment. And, clearly that's, above a certain pay grade, whatever the
hmm
case may be. But I needed that. I needed to get out of it as desperately as possible. But instead, I decided, my friend's right. Let me start somewhere. So I took this job at Dunkin' Donuts. I knew that the pay was, under like, what I was expecting. But I still was hopeful because I'm like, you know what? I'll just take whatever amount this is. I'll just have to work with it. I'll start there. It's fine. I'll just look forward to the first check and I'll figure it out from there. That'll be my starting point. So I'm staying at the train station waiting for this van to come take me back to this homeless shelter I'm staying at. And I believe it was my first check from Dunkin' Donuts. So in my mind, I'm like, again, I know that's probably going to be a little low, but maybe it's in like the 400 or so range. And so I opened the paycheck and I looked and it was far below what I was really hoping, anticipating, or even wanting for that matter. And I just started weeping. I just started crying because I'm just like, this is nothing. I'm not going to be able to get out of this with just this. Why can't I just find something better? why is this the case right now? And I could not stop crying. I could not stop crying because it felt like no matter how, even if I wanted to work as hard as I wanted to, it wouldn't have meant anything because I'd never be able to make more than up until a certain amount. And it's not like the place I was living in was inexpensive either. It was a place called Madison. Yeah, it's Madison, New Jersey. That's not cheap. And I would have never been able to try to, live independently off of that. And I wasn't really able to see much further than just trying to find something immediately. It's just like, I just could not stop crying that night.
And during that time, working at Dunkin' Donuts, were you also attending school?
No, I admit, once 1920 hit, I ended up having to drop out of school, or rather choosing to as well. For me, money and trying to live became my priority, and I admit I did not see how I was going to continue going to school if I didn't even so much as have a place to stay. I didn't see how that was going to work.
And now on the flip side, at what time did you feel the most hopeful?
Oh man, I hate to be cliche, it would probably have to be towards the tail end of it. Um, was definitely when I'd ended up getting talking to the person I ended up rooming with now in the apartment that I'm staying in. And I made this friend randomly because the one benefit about doing the traveling I've done. Needless to say, I've met a lot of different people in those travels, and this one person ended up calling me one particular Saturday night, like August, like some 3 years ago. I was working at a Trader Joe's at the time, and I was trying to really tighten up my sense of responsibility and getting out of it. Like, no, all right, I got this job, I absolutely have to finagle this is something good. Let me start getting down to brass tacks about getting this apartment. Gotta do that. And I'd already started searching and whatnot, and I'd felt hopeful at that time. But what ended up happening, my current roommate, she gave me a call, says, hey man, do you know anyone who happens to be looking for a room? It's going to be so and so. These are some of the details. Is located down in Newark, and it's easily had to be between 11 and 12 o'clock at night. She called me, and I'm just like thinking to myself, there's no way in hell that this is possibly happening at the time when I just so happened to be really buckling down and looking at her apartment. I absolutely talked my way into getting this place, and I've been here for like 3 years. I'd never been more hopeful than having that happen at a time like that.
And so, what other friends have you made throughout your journeys?
Oh, the names are numerous and countless. I've met people and maintained contact with people who I've gone who wanted to interview me when I was still in foster care. People I've grown close to because they used to work with me or what have you. The person who I even refer to as my mother at this point, she used to be a social worker of mine. I have more than a few people who I consider like brothers and sisters who I've had the pleasure of learning about in between all of this turmoil going on. And it's been wonderful. It's been great. I've been granted a lot of different experiences, admittedly, because of it.
And now, during your lifetime, who did you always look up to?
So the father figure one would be a little tricky. For a while, it was this guy named Darren. I met him while still living in Bridgewater at the transitional living home I mentioned previously. And he was one of the caseworkers there. And I immediately took to him because he was a really cool guy, and by chance, he happened to be into a lot of the same hobbies I was. So, for instance, I like giant monster movies like Godzilla and things of that sort, and he just happened to be a huge fan of like a lot of the old movies, black and white, and color and whatnot. And I also love martial arts and old kung fu flicks, even to this day. He just so happened to absolutely love that. I told him about this. He's like, wait, hold on. You love this stuff? Give me like a day, bro. He came back, to his job the next day, and brought out these cases that had nothing but like tapes and DVDs of like all of these movies. And he and I had grown close ever since. He tried to help instill in me a greater sense of confidence by talking to me because I was very emotional at the time, needless to say, while trying to figure out, my life and what it was going to be like after DIFUS and during it. And he really was trying to get through to me. And for a very long time, he was very much like a father figure for me. As far as my mother figure is concerned, Give me 1 second, please.
No problem.
There was a woman that I'd met probably, I think it was 16, 17. Her name is Susan. She ended up being a social worker of mine through a second party care service provider known as Tri City. It was in Newark at the time. No, East Orange, I apologize. And that's how I'd met her. And she was in charge of my case for a while. And somehow we ended up growing very, very close over the years I'd known her. Again, I was very moody, kind of teenager, wasn't really trusting of people. And, here comes this lady, being all nice and whatever. And I'm just like, I don't know what you want. Who are you? Et cetera, et cetera. But after a while, I started to recognize, oh, she's actually trying to help. I don't need to snap out of her so much. I can actually talk to her. She wants to listen to me. And so after a while, after, kind of, growing close to her because I, really crave that maternal attachment, I just started calling her mom after a while. And, I asked her one day, like, I just kind of called you mom. Are you okay with that? She was like, yeah, no, that's fine. I'm just like, and I cannot express to you the amount of joy that I experienced when she told me that I could. I was just like, I could cry right now if I really had it in me.
And do you still keep in touch with her to this day?
Oh no, absolutely. I actually we're supposed to be going for like lunch at some point later in the month, and I've actually ended up going to her house for Thanksgiving ever since I was like what 17.
Hmm. And during your lifetime, what would you say was the nicest thing you ever saw?
The nicest thing somebody did for me. Okay, there's a few things. There was one friend of mine who was staying in New Brunswick. His name was Mike. Mike was really, really nice. I met him at a hobby shop when I was also living in Bridgewater, and we just so happened to connect because he thought very highly of me, as it would turn out. We would have very deep conversations about, politics and history and things of that sort, and we ended up becoming very close because of it. And he was living out in New Brunswick for a while, saying going to school. He knew my situation, and he didn't have to, but as it would, he let me stay in his then apartment at that time. And I decided to leave prematurely because I'd always been afraid of overstaying my welcome anywhere, especially given my situation,
Hmm.
and that I didn't have anything financial to give back. And to this day, he told me, hey, you definitely could have stayed longer. My roommates, liked you and everything. Like, it would have been fine. I was just like, that meant a lot knowing that. I just really wish I could have believed it, but I was just so afraid of, needing more time than what could have possibly been given. Uh, Another incident I can recall easily has to be this one guy who I'd ended up going out to Lewistown, PA for a while. After working at Dunkin' Donuts. Oh, excuse me. Oh, oh. After working at the Dunkin' Donuts for a while, I was really just unhappy, and I wanted and needed a change. A friend was living out in PA at the time, Lewistown. He was like, "Hey, man, you can come out here. I can get you a job if you want to try to start out new, something fresh, that sort of thing. Please come on over." I went out there for a time, stayed out there for approximately 2 months. Unfortunately, things didn't work out there either. And I ended up coming back to New Jersey, and on a Greyhound, I met this man, and we ended up talking just because of the fact that, he saw me there on my artwork and whatnot. And I ended up traveling all the way back to Newark. And by the time I get back to Newark, he's like, hey, brother, where you going? I'm like, oh, I'm not going anywhere. I'm just kind of waiting here for now. It's like, oh, do you need to call anybody or anything? Are you going anywhere in particular? I can, drop you off there. I'm like, oh, no, no, man, I appreciate it. I just kind of figure out what I'm trying to do now. And eventually, after enough questions and talking, he, figured out I was homeless, and he decided to give me some money because he knew I didn't have any. I used the last bit that I had to get back to New Jersey, and he wished me the best of luck. From that point, and I never forgot that. Uh, if I could give one last example, and this one is like really really important. Um, there was a family that I ended up staying with for like 2 weeks during my time, and when I came back into Newark, I ended up making a friend. Her name is Anissa, and she found out my situation as well, and then she started feeding me. I forgot how it even started entirely, but she knew what was happening to me, and she figured that, if anything, I can bring you food as much as possible, which is basically every single day. And if it weren't for her, I probably wouldn't have made it as far as I have right about now. She really took it upon herself to just constantly just bring me this food every day. She didn't have to do that, but she did. And yeah, that definitely is probably one of the better experiences I've had.
So, as we've discussed before, it must have been very difficult for you to keep financially afloat. So, how did you ultimately make ends meet?
So it was a variety of things. I mean, intermittently, I was working. There were jobs that I did manage to hold down. I did have an apartment twice at least in all this time. Um, so for I could feed myself when possible. If there were friends who would let me crash, they would usually feed me or give me money to try to get food. I was on food stamps for a while as well, so I relied on that for as long as that lasted. And while I was still staying in the homeless shelters and whatnot, I absolutely went to churches and whatnot where they were giving free food. And admittedly, it was pretty good. It was nice, pretty nice people there.
And while being homeless, what were some tips and tricks that you have used to maneuver yourself through this new landscape?
Well, for me, it would have to have been trial and error because a lot of the problems that were presented to me, I never have considered because I didn't think I was going to be in the situation. So my best tip and trick would be resourcefulness. Know where you can go. Know who you can go to for things that you may or may not need. Know you who can trust. Be diligent about finding, means to get to certain things on your own as best as you can. And when possible, if you can, ask for help. That goes a long way. I'll give you a good example. Obviously, if I'm not working, I couldn't have an active cell phone, for instance. So the tip I would typically give: have a Google Voice number, even if you have somebody else who has to verify the number, or if you temporarily have a phone on for a while, you only need Wi-Fi to both be able to text and call people. That way, you can stay on the grid as best as possible. You can still receive texts from people trying to contact you. You can make sure you let them know you're okay. You can make calls from, let's say, if you need to do like an interview or something like that. It's not perfect. Obviously, you're not going to have Wi-Fi everywhere, but it's quite frankly better than nothing. So things like that.
And in the end, how did you ultimately work your way out of homelessness?
The big change definitely happened when I ended up getting this apartment that I'm in right now. When my current roommate ended up calling me, and so that was like the first problem I was taken care of. I had a place to stay. At least I had time, or so I felt. I ended up losing the job at Trader Joe's, unfortunately. That was a huge blow. And for a while, I was jobless while having this apartment. I ended up staying and dating Anissa, the one who had gave me all the food, and asked her to live with me. And so for a bit, we were struggling about it, but we ended up doing that together. Um, to make ends meet as best we could until I ended up finding another job. So what ultimately changed that in a more long-term sense, I'd gotten a job at a sandwich shop, and it was decent for what it was, but I ended up in that situation where I have bills to pay. This is only paying up to so much. I need to do something different, or I need to figure out a way to learn how to do something different. So I don't have to be stuck here. This isn't going to be sufficient. I have somebody else that I'm worried about. I have somebody else I want to help take care of. I have somebody else, I want to grow with, that kind of deal. I want to grow. I want more things. So, on a real bold move, I just quit the job. I really did, and decided to take up an apprenticeship doing glass making and glass blowing of all things. Um, I ended up doing that for a while. Oddly enough, they paid you for doing the internship, and it was actually more money than I would have even been making working at that job in the first place. Oddly enough, and I worked that over for a while. Anissa and I managed to, make ends meet. She started working a part-time job as well. So from the glassmaking apprenticeship, the guy who had taught me how to make glass, his name was Jake. Really, really nice guy. He seemed to take a liking to me. So he's like, hey, I have a glass studio over in Roselle Park. I feel as though, this setup right here is kind of limited. So if you come over to Roselle Park, I can teach you more in-depth skills and things of that sort. And I can possibly help you, put you in a position where you can, look for something better. You can do something better. You can earn a lot more money, that sort of thing. I understand the situation, et cetera, et cetera. So I hesitated to do so for a while because admittedly I was still looking for something in a bit more on the practical end. And I didn't think that trying to learn how to make glass, a random wild trade at that was going to be really all that lucrative. But eventually I decided to start stopping by and just sticking around to keep myself busy more than anything, learning little, skills about it here and there. Eventually, and this, turns into this takes a little sharp turn here. What ended up happening is that Jake just so happened to work next door to a guy who worked in an electric company. He came to Jake saying, hey, do you know someone who may or may not be interested in a position for metal plating? We recently, got freed up. We're looking for somebody. We can train them, et cetera, et cetera. Jake immediately thinks to himself, you know what? Hey, I know a guy. So he comes to me and he tells me about the proposition. He says, hey, he's next door. He's looking for a metal plater. You go over there. You fill out the paperwork. You fill out the resume. Go for an interview. And hey, this will give you a really good chance you can get this job. Of course, I did all of that. I interviewed for it. I I ended up getting the job, and to this day, I'm an electroplating technician. That ultimately ended up ceasing my being homeless. I ended up getting the apartment, and then I ended up getting gainfully employed, and I have been there ever since.
And the first day that you realized that you weren't homeless anymore, what was the feeling like?
Admittedly, it was this thing where I was like, I was still so excited about the fact that I was trying to do it that I was just kind of not aware of the fact, like, I guess the shock of it didn't really seem to set in quite as much, or like the sense of, oh wow, this is actually mine didn't really set in. Um, so I ended up getting my own room, and I still had it was a mix of feelings for as I'm sure you can tell right now. I was happy I was no longer there. I was overwhelmed because I'm like, wait, I live with people now. Oh, wait, I have my own room. Wait, this and that. I'm like, wait, what do I do with this? And it was a lot. It was a lot to take in, and there were a lot of curveballs I wasn't ready for because of my time in diapers. As an example, I was not, and I'm still not entirely fully adjusted to living with people, other people, in a more functional sense. So I'm, still somewhat guarded about that. I'm still working at that, just an example. So there was like, things like that I had to get over, living with somebody else, let alone a partner. Only as of very recently did I realize, oh man, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I wasn't ready for this because of, the life that I led up until that point. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm, definitely. I can imagine such a shock living a totally different life, as you've mentioned. And now there's many people in the world who live in the same situation you were in years prior. What kind of advice would you give them?
Do your best, as cliche as it sounds, do your best to keep your head up because like it's rough to put it mildly. You have to accept the fact that, oh man, now I'm part of that group of people that people out on the street are going to start ignoring. Someone, if I ask them for help, may or may not think I'm just trying to get money out of them. What if people think I'm homeless over just being lazy? What if I can't ask people who I was once close with for like, help and things like that? Just do your best to do best for yourself. Try your best, keep at it, keep diligent, be resourceful, build a good circle. Eventually it can end. Eventually it will end. It usually, and in most cases, always does. Well, not always, more often than not, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk a little bit more about Child Protective Services. So, what role in specific did they play in your life?
Probably the most drastic and influential one. Like I mentioned very early on, I'd been in DIFUS since I was literally two when it ended up happening. My grandmother, my mother's mother, was not a very nice person. kind of on the abusive side. So she ended up giving me this scar that I still hold on the right side of my head because she hit me with something and it caused, serious injury, combined with, poverty and my mother being an addict at the time, my dad being absentee. CPS came in, took myself, my brother, one of my older sisters, and we ended up in the system. I ended up in the system from that point up until my big 19. And let me tell you, it is it, it definitely played a part. I ended up meeting Sue obviously because of it, but there was a lot of development that I was lacking that I really couldn't get a grasp of until a little later on. I felt for the longest time very emotionally, socially, psychologically stunted. I felt a range of things from like depression and just these, fits of anger and confusion and helplessness. And I didn't know how to really express that to people. And I'd always felt, so distant from and alienated from other people. I never felt what I would ever call quote unquote normal. I could always see other people who had, as an example, they would have parents and things like that. And I'm just like, I really had to ask myself, what is that like? I want to know what that's like. And just feeling like I was on the outside looking in for like the longest amount of time. I mean, a good example. I didn't even know for the longest time that other foster kids outside of my siblings and I even existed. Be me having this diapers worker coming to my house constantly, and I guess she was taking off my case for a while. And I'm going to school, and I see, me in elementary school, and I see her come into the school. I'm just like, oh, wait, you're not here for me? Then what are you doing here? And she's there for somebody else. I'm like, wait, so there's other kids who are like us? Really? Oh, that's a thing. And it's just like, oh, it's just like, yeah, it's very jarring in a lot of respects. Let's put it that way.
And so, what do you think CPS should have done differently in your life?
I really wish that they could have put me in better places and with better people. I understand that it's not perfect. I still don't think for the type of places and the type of people I ended up experiencing that was really much of an excuse. Um, I really would have hoped I could have felt like there were more people I could have told about the things that had happened to me. And I really wish that I'd felt more secure in what was happening and not so helpless, because I always felt helpless. That even to this day, in a sense, I kind of feel helpless because of that. And a bit more consistency, I guess. Better screening about the kind of people that they allow to even be parents. Some of the people I've stayed with, I'm realizing now is like you shouldn't have opened your home. You really shouldn't have. It would have been better off if you just left your door closed. I think you would have been happier, and a lot of other kids would have been happier to have avoided you.
Hmm. Now, if I asked you the question whether you think CPS has failed you, what would you say?
I would say yes and no. Yes, ultimately, because I still feel as though there was a lot of things that were, I guess, that were thrust on me towards the end of it that I feel as though, it would have been nice if I didn't have to like take all of this on my own, you know, uh, and no, because it's not as if there weren't people who I'd met along the way who were sincerely invested in my well-being and sincerely invested in seeing that I could possibly get to my next steps and who wanted to help and who were compassionate and empathetic towards me. So, it's a bit of both, I would dare say.
So, what changes would you say needs to be implemented in CPS so that what happened to you doesn't happen to other children?
Better, a much more, a much more linear aging out process that doesn't necessarily leave some kid completely unprepared for a world out there that's completely different from the kind of world that they're most likely have grown up in. So, you come from all this very specific kind of dysfunction like I have, and then I get out there and to this day, there's still things that kind of trip me up because I felt as though I was ill prepared for it on a social sense, in a social and psychological sense.
Now, what is one major takeaway or unique perspective that you have gained throughout your journeys?
I don't know that love and kindness goes a long way, that kind of deal. I mean, I've never really had all that much, considerably speaking, comparatively speaking. I'm not sure, but I've always wanted just to be cared about. And for me, more often than not, just to feel sincerely all around that I'm cared about is usually good enough for me. So to keep to those simple things, to keep to the people that you know that you can trust is probably the best I could say. And just, if to the best of your ability, be kind to whomever you can. Just do so. It's even for all of my experiences, I know who I am as a person is usually kind of geared towards wanting to do stuff for other people. I know what it's like not to have. I know what it's like to be isolated. I know what it's like to feel ultimately alone. And for better or worse, for all of my flaws and for all of my issues, I just don't want anybody else to feel like I've had to feel. Because being that alone is terrible. Feeling that isolated and feeling like you just can't connect to other people because you're so afraid that they won't be able to, or willing to understand the amount of things that have gone down with you, that maybe your emotions are too much, or that maybe you're too sad for them or something, and the uncertainty you have about yourself, uh that I don't want other people to feel that sense of loneliness that I do. And so whenever I can, as best as I can, I'm usually pretty nice to everybody just because it's like, why not? I typically like people that are not so bad when I'm usually not being kind of broody about it. And it just helps. It's like, I'm glad that person was able to get something they wanted. I'm glad I was able to help them get that thing that they wanted. And I can be okay with that. So yeah, that kindness, carry that, use that, be that, that sort of thing. That's a lesson I'd say I keep with.
And maybe besides loving kindness, what is one thing that you think we all take for granted now that you've seen both sides of the aisle?
Opportunities normally, mind you, I've blown more than a few opportunities of my own for a myriad of reasons, but I've experienced meeting people who basically have everything that I could have ever dreamed for, financially, familially, in regards of having family and things like that, and they don't do anything with it, or they don't take advantage of them. And it's just like I would kill just to not have to struggle with these specific things. I would love to not have to worry about a safety net or anything like that because your parents will have you covered or something like that. I'd love to not have to be the one who has to muster up all the money that I'm making and things of that sort. I would love to not have to be the one to do all of those things for myself, but I have to. And there are other people who have it and they just don't use it. I'm just like, then, then hell, give it to me. I'll use it.
All right, thank you so much, Khalil. That just about closes our episode. But is there anything else you would like to say?
I've always wanted to share a lot more of my story to other people upon other people's suggestions, but also as a means of catharsis, but also possibly as a teachable moment for anybody. Even now, again, for all of my flaws, the thought of using any of this to benefit some other foster kid or some homeless kid who may or may not be in my range or my area or whatever the case may be, to hear this and know that, dag, like this can be better. This guy can do it. He's managed to, pull past this. Maybe there is something I can do. Maybe he is saying something I hadn't considered yet. Anything that somebody else can take from this. I'm honored to be able to do that. And I'm hoping that someone out there gets something great out of this more than just me being able to sit and talk for for however long this was.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Khalil. I definitely hope that other people will find your story so unique and so interesting just as much as I did.
No, it's no problem. Thank you for even asking me. I'm honored.
Thank you so much for listening to Imagine All the People podcast. This was Khalil, and we hope you will join us for the next episode.